welcome back. My name is Lexi Jong, and here I like to talk about luxury makeup. And today we have another episode of Makeup Mondays. And Makeup Mondays is the series where I get to answer your questions. So if you have any questions or queries that you would like addressed, please leave them down below in the comments and I will add them to my list. So I am keeping a running list of everything that people have requested for future episodes. Today's topic was specifically brought to my attention by Munira Siddiqui, and I apologize if I said your name incorrectly, but this is also a topic that many have asked questions about in the past. So I'm sure that this is a topic that will interest many people, and that is the topic of undertones. Now, a lot of times when undertones are addressed in a makeup video, they are referring specifically to your own undertones, specifically with like foundation matching and so forth. We'll touch on that briefly, but really this video is going to be more about the undertones in makeup and how to tell what they are, so you can kind of determine a little bit better what shades will work best for you, especially if you're shopping online. So we're going to talk about undertones today. And again, if you have any other questions that you would like addressed, please leave them down below in the comments or DM me on Instagram. I am at Alexis Jong. Before we discuss the undertones in makeup, let's briefly discuss the undertones in your own skin. And I personally think that this can be really challenging to figure out. And there are so many things that you can do and look up online to try to help you figure out exactly what your undertone is. Honestly, I think the best way is through trial and error. So unfortunately, sad but true, there are those tests, wearing white versus cream, which one looks better on you? If you look better in a bright white, then you have cooler undertones. And if you look better in a cream or off-white, then you have warmer undertones. That works, but it's still not always a hard, fast rule in my opinion. And I think some of it also has to do with personal preference. So trying a lot of things like that can help you narrow down your undertones. Also, looking at the veins in your skin can help you narrow down your undertones. But something that I think a lot of people kind of ignore is your actual skin has undertones, but your facial skin and other parts of your body, you might see other tones in there that can be misleading. For example, I actually have fair neutral skin. So if you look at my veins, I have green and blue in there, which signifies neutral undertones. If you look at the skin of my neck, you can see that it is more in the middle. I have some warmth and I have some coolness to it. It is smack dab in the middle, neutral. But if you were to just go by what my face looks like, I have so much natural redness in my skin that most of the time, for example, if I were to go and get foundation matched at a counter, a lot of people just automatically assume that I have cool tones because of the redness in my skin. So sometimes you may have some like natural discoloration or something that can be a little bit misleading and make it a little bit more challenging to figure out your true undertones. I think if you are looking at your skin tone, it's best to look at your wrist, not always the veins. I think sometimes telling your undertones from the veins, it can be helpful, but on some people, it's really hard to figure it out. So, but if you look at this area of skin, that can help. And I think looking at your neck can help a lot as well. And, again, I really do think a lot of it is going to be trial and error. Try on a few things that are cool, warm, and neutral and see which ones work best for you. Now, just like anything, your undertones, there are a range. So if I'm in the neutral undertones, there's still like this bar here for neutral. So if I'm smack dab in the middle, I'm 100% exactly neutral. Nobody is really exactly 100% neutral. There's always going to be a little bit of variance. So if this is my bar, I'm actually leaning slightly towards the cooler range. Some people might lean slightly towards the warmer range. And what that means for me and the colors that I like to wear is I really do prefer cooler toned eyeshadows in general. But things that go super, super cool, like some of those really cool toned grays, they don't look the best on me. I am better sticking closer to the neutral range, but I like neutral and cool neutral, and sometimes I'll even go neutral to slightly warm, but anything super warm doesn't look great on me. And I think figuring out what your preference is really important, especially in times like now when everybody is shopping online and it can be a little bit harder to see things in person. And that's one of the reasons I think live swatches are really important, or even just like a finger swatch where you can actually see how something starts off really pigmented and fades out, because that portion where it's faded out is where you can really see a lot of the undertones. So we will be looking at that today as well. Now let's start off with some basics. We have the primary colors. We have red, yellow, and blue. Blue is going to signify cooler tones. Red and yellow signify warmer tones. And then obviously we have how those things mix to create other colors. For example, purple is a mix of blue and red. If you mix equal amounts of red and blue, you have a perfectly neutral purple. Most of the time when we see purple products, we're going to see something that either leans a little pink or leans a little blue. And things that can lean more red are going to be warmer tone purples, and things that lean a little bit bluer are going to be cooler tone purples. Same thing with red lipsticks. We've got the orangey reds, and then we have the blue based reds. Again, that's going to be our warm and our cool tone reds. Now, I just want to say that when you are looking at warm tones, just because you have something, for example, red is a warm color in general, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be a warm shade on you. The way that cosmetics are made, mixing all of these colors together, all of the undertones essentially, you are going to add more pigments of other colors, such as blue, to get a blue-based red and so forth. And that's where it makes it more wearable for people of different skin tones. Now, taking a look at this color wheel that I have on the screen here, this is just an example, and this line through the center where it's separating the warm and the cool colors, depending on which color wheel you look at, you might see this moved a little bit. It can be shifted a little bit. But in general, things with yellow, orange, or red undertones, they will be warmer. And anything with blue is going to be more on the cooler side. And your greens, you can see here on this wheel, they've got the yellow green on the cool side. Sometimes when you see this line shifted, you'll see the yellow green on the warmer side. And it's really going to depend on how much yellow to blue you have in proportion to create that yellow green color. Those that are strongly yellow based are going to be warmer in tones, and we can see that with certain olive shades. And things that have a little bit more blue, even if it's still a yellow green, those can be a cooler tone. And a lot of times those come off as more of a brighter green in this case. Let's start off by going over some colors. Now, your neutral colors are typically going to be anything white, black, gray, and then in makeup, we also consider a lot of browns to be a neutral shade as well. And when you are looking at neutral brown shades, you have things that lean either cool or warm, and occasionally you have things that are exactly neutral in the middle. And really what we want to do to figure out exactly what that is kind of look at how those colors disperse, in my opinion. And again, I am not a professional. This is what I do to figure out undertones and what has worked well for me. So this here is the Dior palette in 669 Soft Cashmere. And we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna swatch these shades. So these are the top 3. And here are the bottom 2. And let's take a look at what I mean by figuring out the undertones in an eyeshadow. Now, when you are figuring out the undertones for a swatch, in my opinion, I think one of the easiest and best ways to do it is to feather out the edges. And that's why I like to do live swatches on my channel, because you start off with a really pigmented and then it fades. And where that fading is where you can often see some of the undertones that are there, because sometimes you have a color where it's built up and it'll look more like one particular shade. But as you buff that out, it actually is gonna look either a little warmer or a little cooler than what you may have initially thought. Now, another thing I'd like to note before we actually look at these specific shades is that sometimes something will look one way until you put it next to other shades. So for example, if you look at this brown here on its own, it looks like a nice medium tone brown, and it might look, you know, a little bit on the cooler side. And then when you compare it next to something else that is a little bit cooler in tone, you can see that warmth kind of gets emphasized. So sometimes your undertones will look a little different with what you pair it with. And that can be really helpful with makeup, because if you have a particular shade that you love, but maybe it doesn't look the best on you on its own because of the undertones, if you then pair it with something else that is the opposite. So for example, for me, anything that's like a really warm pink shade, if I pair it with something cooler in tone, then that really helps kind of neutralize the overall look. And I think it looks a lot better overall. So that's just one way you can kind of get around some of the undertones. Now with these particular shades, as I said, this is the Dior Soft Cashmere palette, and this is going to be a neutral brown palette, but overall the palette leans a little bit cooler in tone. And when you see all of these shades together, they might look a little, for example, this one here in the middle looks pretty darn warm, but it's actually more of a true neutral. And you can see when we buff this out, you can see some of that golden undertone in there that leans a little bit warm. Now, when you're looking at brown shadows, one of the things when you feather them out, your cooler tone ones are going to have a little bit more gray in them, and your warmer tones are going to have a little bit more yellow or red undertones to them. So we can see here when we feather these out that this one here, although, you know, on its own, I think it looks a lot cooler. And then when you put it next to this shade, I think it looks a lot warmer. But when you feather it out, if you look at it isolated, you can actually see this has more of a gray base to it. So it is a cooler tone brown, but you can also see a little bit of red in there. So you've got the red and the gray balancing, which makes it a pretty good neutral. Now in this particular case, I think there's slightly more gray than there is red, and that's what makes it more of a cooler toned neutral. Now, looking at this palette here, this is the Chanel 362 Candere Provocation. If we look at this brown shade here, in the quad here, it looks kind of like a muddy yellow brown. So it definitely looks warm in tone. And you can see when you put this warm brown next to this shade here, now all of a sudden that this is gonna look a lot cooler in retrospect. And you can tell, even if you can't tell just by looking at that straight on, if you feather this one out, you can see how much yellow there actually is in there. Now, I think a lot of times where the undertones can get confusing are some of those shades that are on the cusp. So let's take a look at some pinks. This here is the SUQQU palette in 136. We're gonna look at this pink shade here. And when you feather this one out, you can see that there is gonna be kind of this like orangey tone to it. That's signifying that this is going to be a warm pink, and this is a pink that is going to look great on warmer skin tones. Now it is still, you know, it's not all the way warm. If it were all the way warm, you would see more of a deeper orange and maybe some more red in there. And then that would kind of exclude people from with cooler skin tones from, you know, being able to wear it successfully. This one still, you know, this like peachy shade, it's more of a peachy pink shade, which means that we're still closer to the neutral range in this case. So it can be worn by cool and warm skin tones, but people with super cool skin tones probably won't look great in this particular shade. This is the Viseart Petite Pro SUQQU palette. Now let's take a look at this pink. So this pink here is going to be a cool tone pink. And sometimes you'll see cooler tones are also going to be something that has more of a bright white base. So cream bases to products are going to typically be for warmer colors, whereas bright white bases are typically for cooler colors. So a lot of your really bright shades are often going to be a little bit cooler in tone as well. That's not always the case, but with bright pinks and greens and colors on the cusp, that is often the case here. Now, this particular pink, when you shear this one out, all you're seeing is pink. You're not seeing much, and that's because this one does have kind of a pure base to it. And there's actually, you can kind of see like a little tinge of blue in there, and that's going to help signify this one as a cool tone pink. And notice how rusty this one here looks next to the cooler tone. Now let's look at something real quickly other than eyeshadow. Let's look at some eyeliners. So this is the Chantecaille Luster Glide Silk Infused Eyeliner in Black Forest. So this is it. Now, if you see a swatch like this online, you know, it might be a little challenging sometimes to figure out the undertones when they just give you like a little line here. In this case, this is going to be a forest green, and forest green typically is going to have a lot of blue in there, and you can kind of see the depth of this, how much blue there is in there. So this would be a cooler tone green. In contrast, something like the Olive Brocade has a lot of yellow and gold in there, aside from the gold shimmer, but there is more yellow in there. So this is going to be a warmer toned green. Purple is another shade on the cusp. This is Amethyst, and again, we're still in the Chantecaille. And if you look at this one, you know, kind of the way the light hits it, sometimes you can see some brown in here, but this is actually, you see like the reddish look to that. That red hue is what is signifying that as a warm tone purple compared to this one here, which is Violet Damask. And this one has a lot of blue. And you can see when I buff these out, you can see that the Violet Damask has more of that gray and black base in it compared to the Amethyst, which has more of a reddish brown base. And that's one of the things that will help signify warm versus cool tones as well. So let's take a look at a few brown eyeliners. These are from Linda Hallberg. This is Calf Flash, and that one's right here. And then we have Grayish Core, which is here. And let's pick one more. This is Aweva Flash. So when you look at these, they're all browns. Browns are typically considered a neutral, but you can see when we look at them that they do have warm and cool tones to them. This one here is going to have more of a gray look to it. That's going to be a cooler tone brown. This one here, you can see more yellow in there, which is going to be warmer tone. And this one here is going to have more of that reddish coppery tone, but you can still see some grayish tones to that one as well. So this one's going to be more neutral, but it's neutral leaning warm because of those coppery red accents. Now, when I did the review on the Violette palette from Viseart, I mentioned that this is one of the few palettes with purple shades that lean on the cooler side. So we're going to swatch a couple of these. So I swatched Violette, Haze, and Jezebel. And put these here, and you can see here that you've got a strong blue base in Violette. You have a blue shift with kind of like a bright white base with Jezebel, and Haze itself is going to have a soft blue base as well. So those are all signifying cool tones. We're going to compare them to some Surratt shadows. This one here is Tyrian, and you can see here that Tyrian is going to have more of that gray base, but you can see some brown in there. So this one's more neutral. And if you look closely, you can also see a little bit of pink in there. So this is actually going to be more of a neutral purple, but it's going to lean a little bit warm. It's still pretty darn neutral though. Then we have the shade Amaryllis. This one's going to be more of a pinky purple, but you can see how much red is in there compared to blue, which makes that one going to be a little bit warmer tone, but there is still blue in there. And even though this is more of like a magenta shade, you can consider it a cooler tone magenta or a warmer tone purple. And then we have Violaceous. And this one here is going to have more of that gray base. So you can see that that one's going to be cooler in tone as well. Now, if you look at something like the Natasha Denona 28 Pan Blue Purple, you can see that pretty much everything here is going to be warmer in tone. And then you have this one here that's going to be purple with a blue base, but the rest of these are all going to be considered purple shades with more of a red base. So this one here, let's swatch this. And there you go. You can see how much red and brown there is in that base there. It's still a purple shade, but it is a warm tone purple. This quad here is the Chanel 356, and we're gonna look at this purple shade here. I'm gonna put this one right here. And you can see that in the pan, it actually looks more of a cool tone purple, especially next to these other shades here with more red and pink in them. But when you actually spread it out, you can see that this one does have more of a pinkish reddish base to it, which means it's actually going to be a little bit more of a warmer tone purple than you might expect. Okay, so last we're just going to finish up with some lipsticks. So we're looking at Lisa Eldridge lipsticks, and this one here is Velvet Morning. So look at this. It's a nice bright red. What do you think it is right away? Warm or cool? We're going to swatch these right here. So this one here is Velvet Morning. On its own, it looks like a pretty straightforward red. When you shear that out, you can actually see that you've got some pink in there, you've got a little blue in there, and you've got some orange in there. And that's what's going to be really unique about Lisa Eldridge lipsticks, is she kind of mixes undertones in here, so they're more wearable for people who prefer cool and warm tones. And this one overall though still has more of that orange vibe to it. You can see you've got more of this like bright coral instead of a bluer based pink, which means this one's still going to lean a little bit on the warmer side. In contrast, we have Velvet Ribbon, and this is a true blue based red. Again, in true Lisa Eldridge fashion, you know, you've got bluish undertones. Can you see the bluish tint to that pink? Okay, but you've also, obviously you've got red and everything in there as well, but that bluish undertone is what is going to make this a cooler based red. This one here is Velvet Jazz. So Velvet Jazz here, again, looking at it piled up, it might be a little hard to tell until you buff it out. And when you buff that out, you can see that you've got pink, you've got red, you've got kind of this like cranberry shade in there, and you actually have a little bit of purple. So again, Lisa Eldridge has kind of that mix of undertones. She's got cool and warm tones in there. So then in that case, you want to look at what your primary shade is in here. And I think for me, the primary shade is a yellowish red. So this is going to be a warmer tone. And then you have something like Velvet Dragon, which you can tell straight off the bat, this is going to be a warm tone. Even piled up, you know, it looks very orange, kind of like this rusty orange shade. And when you feather it out, you can see you actually do get a touch of pink in there as well, like a cooler tone pink. But overall, your primary tone is going to be more of this rusty orange, making it warm tone. So again, with Lisa Eldridge, even though these three are primarily warm tone and this one is a bright, cool toned red, these are all still going to have like a mix of undertones, which can make them a little bit harder to decipher. You can see here you've got kind of that deep cranberry, which actually leans a little bit cooler. You've got kind of like this purpley shade in here, which is a little bit cooler. So when you have things that are kind of mixed like that, you really want to look at just what your predominant sense is for it. And if you can't tell, you can always try putting it next to something pure white and seeing how that accents it and whether it looks better with pure white or cream, that can help. I hope this video ended up being helpful. It can be really challenging to explain how I identify and visualize undertones, but for me, in essence, I am visualizing the color wheel in my head and trying to see whether I see more yellow or more blue tones in a product. And a lot of times sharing them out can help with that. And in general, if you see more of a brown base to a product, for example, eyeshadows often have a brown base or a gray base. If you see more of that brown base, most of the time you're looking at something warmer in tone. If you see more of a gray or black base, you are oftentimes looking at something cooler in tone. There are always exceptions to the rule, but in general, I try to look at the base shades, and anything bright white or gray or black or blue is going to end up being cooler in tone, and anything with more of that cream or yellow or gold or brown bases, or even like a deep red base, even those can be warmer in tone. So that's essentially how I try to figure things out. If you're looking at pinks for blushes and so forth, anything with more of a bright pink look to it is typically going to be cooler in tone. If you see more of a peachy tint to it, it's usually going to be warmer in tone. So I hope this was helpful. And if you have questions on this, please let me know. I hope I didn't confuse anybody more on this point, because I know that this can be really hard to explain and to understand. So I think, again, trial and error is your best bet until you kind of figure out what works well for you. So if you have any future questions for Makeup Mondays, please leave them down below in the comments. Let me know what you thought of this video and if there is anything you would like me to expand upon in the future. And thank you so much for watching. If you like the video, please give me a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Have a great day.